Professor led us through the historical perspective, and now we're going to hear from the cultural side. And this is very important for us, because a lot of the things that we appear to be ashamed of is really things we should be proud of. And so we're going to invite Mrs. Patricia Glinton-Meicholas, well-known author, social activist, and great Bahamian, to come and present on the topic from Africa to the Bahamas from the cultural perspective. Give her a hand.
Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here this evening. I think it's fortuitous that I am with Pam Burnside, my friend there. We have a radio show for Creative Nassau, the non-profit that we are working furiously to do to support all of this kind of effort, to show to people that Bahamians have brains, you know what I mean? Yeah. But the thing is, we're the strangest people in the world. Diamonds we have in ourselves. I always say Bahamians are geniuses. We have a wonderful land. I'm working on something now that talks about the wonders of the Bahamas. And honestly, the mention of Elijah Morris, one thing Reverend Moss didn't mention was something more dramatic happened, because it was easy enough for the owners of the ship to claim their property. But Nassauians went out in small boats and refused to let the ship go. They in fact took slaves from the Creole that Elijah Morris and his companions mutinied on. And so there was always this sense that freedom was a right of theirs. But I say tonight, and I'm glad to have this opportunity, we cannot ever think or speak of freedom as a completion, something that is done. No act can ever do that for you. Freedom, emancipation is an ongoing process. And the thing is, freedom is so easily lost if you're not aware of that and are willing to work to be free. And one of the important things in emancipating yourself, because we are not yet emancipated, because the thing is, if you don't know many of the things that were spoken here already, you still have a way to go, because emancipation depends on your knowing your identity, knowing who you are, knowing what your responsibilities are, knowing who made you what you are today, and acknowledging that. Mr. Bain, Alexander Bain's monument should not have been destroyed. I'm glad there are people who decided it was important enough to keep it. But in any case, my presentation tonight is about, no, don't give me a pulpit. My subtitle is Bahamian Culture, a Unique Tributary of the Great African River. As with cultures around the globe, Bahamian culture has been shaped by many factors, most particularly geographic and economic factors, the lands from which the people who settled in our islands originated, and to a substantial degree, the nature of the social interactions among the various groups. This evening, we are focusing on the contributions of Africa to the cultural heritage of the Bahamas. And it's very important for me and I must, before I go on, say thank you to Reverend Moss, to the University of the Bahamas, and to Dr. Chris Curry. We have a little history, and I have such a respect for him. While I was still at the college, we did several very good things together on the same subject. And thank you, Madam Provost, and thank the President for us allowing us to be here. But this evening is important for several reasons. Persons of African descent have been here for a long time. They were among the earliest of the post-Lucayan settlers. People tend to forget that. And then they came with the first Eleutherian adventurers, and when Bermuda said, oh good, they've gone off to that rock, let's scour Bermuda and see if we can get rid of the rest of the malcontents being Puritans, like the William Sale and Company, as well as all black people, prostitutes, whatever they thought was the people they thought unworthy to darken their doors in Bermuda. I don't know if Bermuda has much changed. It is suggested that on the Georgia and South Carolina low country rice and indigo plantations, the slaves had little contact with the white population. Demographics are really important in the story we have to tell. If, for example, you were in those, the greater American plantations where you were always heavily supervised and all of this. But the thing is, the lovely thing is, these owners in the low country, the sea islands of Georgia and the Carolinas, did not want to get, their marshy water flooded for most of the year. Didn't want to get, what do you call that stuff from the mosquito bites, Exactly, malaria. So they figured, oh, the Africans have a resistance to that, let's import some. And of course they wanted economic value, so they water, rice is natural. So I want you to know this evening, the Chinese did not make you rice eaters. That's very important. People from the Senegambia region in Africa, encompassing territories like present-day Senegal and the Gambia, were rice growers, very clever rice growers. So the Carolinians and the Georgians imported a lot of them to grow rice, and they made fortunes from it. Now, I mention them because these people, these particular Bonds people, were among, in large numbers, among those who came to the Bahamas with the Loyalist exodus. But these people, because they were sort of isolated, had a chance to create a world of their own. And out of that came, if you look at the Gullahs now are losing that harmonization because of the intrusion of the outer world, for example. But they were able to create, because people who tended to write before present day, oppression was such that the black man from Africa could not remember anything of where he came from, his culture, and so on. He was acted upon rather than an actor in his own drama. That's a lie. Anyway, another point is by the early 1800s, Bahamians of African descent formed the majority of the population and have continued to occupy that demographic superiority to 2017. That's important. The African contribution to the New World, this is what brings me here this evening, has long been minimized, often scorned, and it has most often gone unrecorded, especially in this country, or erased. It's only now people like Chris and many others, Reverend Moss, and so, going and digging out bits and pieces and stitching those pieces together into a patchwork quilt that makes sense to us. But we weren't important enough to be recorded. So that is another point. Bahamians of today, and this is the main one, tend not to know enough or care enough about this aspect of our heritage, to the detriment of the perception of self-worth, of self-esteem, and of the formation of an identity of quality. This presentation, and I assert, the African cultural heritage contributed significantly to shaping the New World descendants of Africa. An amalgam of West African languages influenced the Bahamian Creole grammar and vocabulary in many ways. It also significantly and sometimes subtly influenced Bahamian life cycle customs, family relations, religious worship, notions of how the world works. For example, to the time I know when I was a little girl, people on Cat Island were still, when they saw a water spout, were getting out something sharp, a knife or scissors to cut it. That comes straight from the African heritage. They believed that that would stop it, and strangely enough, it often worked. Anyway, so also you had influenced economics. Great influence on our food, music, dance, literature, and art. But unfortunately, I need about a week to begin to open this subject. So I only have a short time, so this has to be a galloping survey of what I call a rich fund of ancestral gifts. It is important to note that happenstance or deliberate planning brought together peoples of many different African ethnicities. For survival, the Africans learned to live together and created a new blended family networks and customs. Consequently, you will find that the African legacy is often the patchwork that I speak about of tribal contributions, where the contributions of various tribes. Anyway, so I can just touch on some of the main elements of the African contribution tonight. For one thing, the African descended Bahamian family structure closely mirrored the African exemplar. I found it strange because, well, I happened to be a really happenstance born on Cat Island, and my maternal grandfather was headmaster there, so we were sent to the family farm from time to time. He had no farm because he was an interloper there. But the thing is, I used to see these women. I thought they were women who were called Da, or Dada. And why would they be saying that? Isn't this a woman? And that is a direct retention from Africa. You see, because in family relations, everybody had a special position, had a special title, because respect was very important in these communities. We have lost that. Respect for elders, even respect. I know of many older people who, to my surprise, told me they never called their oldest brother by his first name. He was Sir Bulla. Bulla was just as the older sister was Da or Dada, or Tita. Exactly. See, you know these things. And these things, all of this meant respect. You never called an older person by his or her first name. It was always with some title of honor. And for example, Velocity, that brother, whatever, all of those honorifics. And for want of anything different, us mother, and even notice, I don't know if you experienced it, husband and wives calling themselves Mr. So-and-so and mother or Mrs. So-and-so. And this is what the children heard. Now, what they said after hours is a different Anyway, language is a big, big one, because we don't even know, and we have my respected linguist friend in the back there. She can correct me anytime she likes. Anne Lawler, who has served the university very well in that department. But in any case, we have retained a number of just hidden below the surface, because we don't know our history, we don't know the behavior of some of the tribes who came here. But there are many features of West African languages and dialects in Bahamian Creole. I just look at, for example, how we mark tense and aspect of verbs, for example. There are some things with the intrusion of modernity, some features that have been lost. Because, for example, you would say, I'd go to town, or I've been a go to town, for example. You don't hear that anymore. Maybe some deep in some recesses of Acklands or someplace. But one thing is very noticeable. The linking verb, or what linguists call the copula, the verb to be, is found in Standard English. But we don't need it in Bahamian. We do quite well without it. In Standard English, you hear I'm going to town. I am, that be part. Now, the Bahamian might say, I going to town, that's the old stuff. Or I go into town with the more modern version of it. We're educated now, so we put that in on. One of my favorites is the use of the duh. That you bookie, that's you bookie. Da the you, that day or duh meant it's you bookie, for example. Now, a big one is the use of say, a conjunction that replaces the English that. She said that she went to town. That is direct that say, she tell me say she gone to town. That one is holding on. And that definitely comes from the African heritage. Consider also how we render future time in BC. The nice version, the Standard English version is, I'm going to town tomorrow, I shall go to town tomorrow. Now, in Bahamian, we have versions, but I could go to town tomorrow, the ga or ga, for example. And then I've been, the past tense, I went to the store as opposed to I've been to the store. But depending on the need for emphasis, you might say I've done been. Already. That thing, that done is very useful in describing a certain attitude aspect of what you're talking about. We sing of the ancient homeland when we use what linguists term reduplication, and you know what my favorite one is, true. As a true Bahamian, right and forward. We don't, Standard English would say very, as a very pretty girl. We'd say, boy, she pretty. And then we were told that, we went to a grammar school, you have to enunciate that with these and those and so on. But that sound occurs in few African languages, so it gets rendered as these and those, and of course you get ashamed of it. But I can tell you it's okay. We are bilingual, some trilingual, because some of our people have other languages, and just because they speak that doesn't mean they're any less Bahamians. People, come on now. It's time. Honestly. It has political implications to recognize certain populations. But the point is, the silly thing is, in that cover ignorance has put over our heritage, those people were right there contributing to building what we know as the Bahamas today. It's time to acknowledge all of them, whether they came from, their ancestors came from Europe. There was a guy, oh, I love this one, who went to Cat Island, a Hawaiian, and his name was too hard for the people to pronounce, so he called himself Smith. The first Chinese, for example, didn't come here from China. They came from around the time of the Cuban Revolution for Independence. Cuba had a fairly large Havana Chinese population, and so the first ones came from there. Okay, also feature of our language is that the Africans are very much into metaphorical speech, looking at the world in that way. And so the language is, and wisdom conveyed in these metaphorical terms, and they are lovely. And I just have a few examples here. Bucket go every day to the well, one day the bottom to drop out. Everything, I love this. And I mention here things like this because it wasn't a case of hanging on to memories and paying no attention to the new land in which you found yourself. A syncretism took place. People were smart enough. Oh, I'm here. I have to try to come to terms. This is my home. Let me help to shape it myself. So you have proverbs like, everything that cut in the sea ain't sharp. And cockroach don't ask fowl to dance for good reason. And you know, I hope you were told at some point in your life, you know what dark in the hole when the tiger tail fall. My mother's favorite was put man masthead. Again, a sea, a marine metaphor. Put somebody on the masthead in the crow's nest to look around to make sure nothing, you're not running aground or you're not being attacked. So it is a warning. Keep your eyes open, be alert. Now, something I love that is vibrant still today, and I think always will because it speaks to the soul of the Bahamian. It's call and response that occurs in many situations, or harmonizing. These linguistic behaviors, believe me, that we share with the Igbos of Africa. It is a verbal comment we make in response to a speaker, mostly in public gatherings, and especially to indicate approval of what is being said. Here at home, the practice is common in church services, public meetings such as, of course, political rallies. In church, we hear fervent declarations from the person in the pulpit. Children, we keep in church today, or there might be repetitions of a portion of scripture the speaker just read. And Jesus said, "But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give, him shall never thirst. But the water that I give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life." With mounting passion to rouse the crowd, he might repeat, "Shall never thirst. Shall never thirst." Hear me, church, shall never thirst. Common responses from the Bahamian congregation are, "Tell the truth, Pastor." God don't lie. The worship services in some Baptist and fundamentalist congregations must be spirited, or the congregation will go home dissatisfied and say, "Lord, the service was dead." The spirit wasn't moving. Pastor watch out if that happens. Such services, as I have witnessed, might be called song and dance performances. Because again, for the African, very serious worship, their spirituality was very much bound up in song and dance. But all of a sudden, you know, the dour, sour-faced English told us that dancing in church, that's a no-no. Indeed, evil. Anyway, I've had some lovely experiences because I was invited to a church on Blue Hill Road, and I was amazed. I'm so glad to that lady. She's gone now. But I was so glad to witness that. Didn't know this kind of thing existed. But as the person delivering the homily was speaking, the organist, it was a call and response between pastor and the instrument. You know, da-da-da-da-da, and Jesus said, da-da-da-da-da. You get call and response in music that I love. You will get it from singers like the Region Bells, for example, Dicey Do. You get this call and response. So this kind of linguistic behavior has influenced a lot of what we say or sing. You have, I must mention, we have family. It's certainly in the Carolinas and Georgia for sure. You just have to hear them speak and hear them, you know, the way they cook and everything, and you know their family. But I want you to know that family, and I have traced this through folklore, and it's delightful. I spend a lot of my research life deepening my research into folklore, and through it I have found that we have connections across the region as far as Brazil, and I'll tell you a connection there a little later. You can run me off if you get tired. I probably used up my time. Lifestyle, life cycle customs are really important. We have inherited the African belief system that the divider between the spirit world and the one of that the living occupy is an extremely permeable membrane which facilitates an active intercourse between the quick and the dead. Those who are most subject to crossing the boundary are infants, small children, who are not long removed from the womb, and the dying and the dead. To me, I don't think it's a mistake that womb and tomb rhyme. And certainly in the African belief system, there's good reason for that. We believe that children can see spirits, for one thing, and be possessed by spirits if you don't have parents who are savvy to this kind of thing. Spirits, good and bad. So to this day, many Bahamians continue to tie a black ribbon on a baby's person to prevent those occurrences. We tend not to name a baby for a dead relative, especially one who is not politically correct, for fear the child might inherit the bad character of the departed. Because of the permeability of the shared borders of life and death, it is important in the Bahamas, as it is in Africa, to observe certain rituals to ensure that the dying don't get any notion to defy the natural cycles of existence, and ensure that the dead stay put. And as some people will tell you, they don't sometimes. We have to put up the appropriate fences to make sure. A corpse must always be removed from where the person has died, feet first. Because if you don't do that, you take them out head first, they're looking towards the door, and they will return. So if you have somebody die in your business place or in your home, remember that. You take them out feet first. If there is a funeral going on, at least I think we eased up on that a bit. But you would close up every chink because that's all the spirit wanted, a place to inhabit. So you had to sit in the heat until the procession, the coffin passed by. That is likely to, well, it's supposed to scotch any plans for any unsummoned return. Spirits can advance. They have an entry. They can access us through dreams or obeah rituals. And obeah is it's a kind of leftover, by the way we've interpreted, very serious religious practices, for example, or Risha worship, for example. And we were told, because the point is, I have to emphasize, because my biggest thing is, I am a very peaceful person. Only one thing can raise anger in me, discrimination of any kind. Because you call your God by one name, and some people all over the world call, but everybody has that perception that there's something beyond us. And we are very much pressed to worship, you know. So, the dreams. In the first instance, the revenant tends to alert the dreamer to sickness or enemies or danger, or they can bring good news. In the Bahamas, the latter is usually a heads up to the number that will fall in the The wise will take note, though, listen to this, that spirits speak backwards. Notice I say spirits. So it is probably sensible to back the number. Or boxes. Some inveterate gamblers are crass enough to tell a dying relative or friend to bring them a winning number. In this regard, this business of the spirit world and all of this, you have to stop spirits from returning. And I tell you honestly, I am so lucky because I'm open and I get invited to things, and I'm so glad it helps me in my research. A very dear friend of my family, in fact she was married to my father's cousin, died, and the church itself, I shall not call it, in a faraway corner of this island. I found it amazing, and this is a characteristic of these congregations. The opening song went on for an hour. They kept on, kept on going, and then they gave it up. Anyway, another specific against interstate spiritual travel was to lay the spirit and provide the one who was passed on with what they may need in the afterlife. It was also necessary to place charms around the grave to protect against demonic forces and other wicked intruders who may disturb the rest of the departed. In making such provisions, we continued the African custom of placing things, personal belongings of the deceased, on the grave. And the point is, last time I was in Cat Island, and that wasn't so long ago, I saw in the grave where the eaves are buried, I came across a grave that had plates on it. But the thing is, it has to have a crack in it to release the spirit, or that will be the anchor for the spirits holding them here to earth. So, but also another thing, as in West African cultures, at the same time, it's a funeral that should be a celebration of life. Until quite recently, you only see it now in grand funerals. But there used to be a band in front to lead people to the cemetery, for example. Now, dance, I find this interesting, because you think, what are the distinctions? But in worship, the form of worship from which we get Russian in the church. People would go like this and never move the feet from the ground. And again, that's contact with a spirit world, some aspect of that. All of the movement would, a lot of the movement would be directed to the, this area, the pelvic area, wind down and all this, and the feet, you'd rent a tile, wouldn't move from the floor. Rent a tile, yeah. Stay in the spot, especially if it's somebody, you really care about. Anyway, but notice the difference. Even dances, I don't mean the things just in ethnic dress and all this, but the way people move. You'll find that the Irish and the Scottish, for example, and the Spanish move the feet in very quick and intricate movements. And the difference is with people of African heritage, the concentration is on moving this part because it was once a fertility ritual, for example. And so, they concentrate on the important part. But like I say, ring dancing, for example, ring dancing is so important across this region. Now it's evolved into play and entertainment. But that circling was ritual, a way to connect with the deities, for example. But now we've turned it into play. I have to talk a bit, I'm going to go real fast now. Straw craft. This is what Pam and I and Creative Nassau are fighting for, to get it recognized. When I tell you, if you really are shown, but the Bahamas came up with so many different weave patterns, so clever, that travel the world over, you don't see them. They were invented here. Even in the Gullah region, you don't see it. You see those baskets where they weave the circular things. We have them because the Androsians came from on the west side of Andros. They came from those areas, the Carolinas and Georgias, joined with the Seminoles in Florida, and they fled Florida seeking freedom. They settled in the farthest place away from civilization in this country, on the west side of Africa, and it's a shame when you see what has happened with red bays. We need to do something about that. Now, my favorite subject, the folk tales. If it were not, every time I mention this, I say thanks to a young woman named Peaches. She was at university the same time as me. And in a conversation, university students like to talk and all this. We were talking about culture, and she declared, "Oh, don't say anything. You Bahamians have no culture. You washed out Americans." And so from that point, I studied foreign languages, and I was supposed to write my long study in that vein about Spanish literature or something, French literature, something about language, something about German, and so on. But I got special permission from the university to write about, and I asked her, please define culture for me, I might be missing out. When she did, I said, we have culture, and I set out to prove it, and they gave me permission to write about it. I started to research the subject. I am very proud I got a distinction for that. The power of Bahamian creativity. But here is, there were people like Zora Neale Hurston who could say, do you know, at some point she said, the Bahamas had a richer tradition of song and story than Jamaica or Trinidad. Would you believe it? Wow. And we have, and the thing is, I realized things that I had learned as a child were disappearing, because I'd say something to somebody and they wouldn't know what I was talking about, you might hear, oh, Bookie and Rabbi, that's it. Or the ones who went to school when they brought in the West Indian readers, Anansi. Anansi did not survive for long in the Bahamas. Anansi is the chief trickster throughout the Caribbean, but he is left behind for us in something like every time a riddle, every time the wind blow, Anansi coattail tail. And one or two other things, maybe a brief story or two, but the central characters are Bookie and Rabbi. And I want you to know how special it is that we have them. I believe we may have been the transition node because they come directly from the Senegambia region. And I believe we were the sort of keepers of the treasure in this area. But you know who took it onward? I found in my researches there are two stories about Bookie and Rabbi in the old mines district of Missouri. And the man who collected them said they were taken there by two French-speaking Negroes. They had to be Haitians because, you know, Haitians flooded Louisiana after the Revolution, for example. And there was always trade because they were French territories, for example. So the thing is, if you notice the names, the Dominican Republic has it, and they have, I always point out, they call rabbit la pen. They have a word in Spanish for rabbit, so why do they call it la pen, like lapin for French, you know? So that means it was transmitted to them from the Haitians, for example. But hear this, the Haitians have Bookie and Timalis. The chief trickster is called Timalis. The Bahamas and just a couple other places, I think maybe 4 places in total, have retained those characters in their original format from the Senegambia region. That's treasure you got to remember and talk about, brag about, hey people, look what we have, but we don't even know about it. So the thing is, we have relatives across the region because of this, and you know about the survivability of Africans. I decided to go after Chicchani. I got tired of people saying, oh, the Chicchani, they had 2 or 3 lines about Chicchani. Nobody ever wrote about Chicchani. So I decided, I said, I got to see if this character exists anywhere else in the region, maybe in the world. And I kept digging, and to my surprise, and they go by different names, but I know it's the same character, because the chief characteristics are the feet are turned backwards, the heel's in the same plane as the feet. They have red glowing eyes, and they're covered with some kind of feathers or something, and they're little people. The other commonality is that they are guardians of the forest. Can you imagine a kind of advanced thinking like that? That if you harmed animals or trees and all this, you could fall victim to the Chicchani. And they say that's what happened to the Chamberlain Sisal plantation in Andros, because Neville Chamberlain, who became Prime Minister of Britain, was the son sent to manage that plantation and was here off and on for about 7 years. But that failed spectacularly, and people would say it was the Chicchani. Though the Chicchani has different names, like in Belize, it's Duende. Oh, I was so thrilled when I found the creature in Brazil, Curupira. And so this tells me that we have these relations that we tend to resent. All we could say is, oh, we're not Caribbean, we're Atlantic people and all. I might as well tell you, you have Bahamians in Trinidad who were taken there against their will when people were trying to escape the registration of slaves. We have relatives in northern Cuba, for example, and we are bound by this African heritage. we need to exploit it for the benefit of all, you know. Anyway, that is what I had to say.